You wouldn't believe this happened in America. A 72-year-old black mother, kind, gentle, was cutting flowers in her own yard when a white police officer shot her point blank in the chest. The reason she didn't look like someone from the neighborhood. No apology, no warning, just a shout, a moment of panic, and a bullet that ended an innocent life. But what the police officer didn't expect was she was the biological mother of a federal prosecutor. From that moment on, everything turned into a thriller. A federal investigation cameras that exposed the truth, racial profiling exposed, and a historic conviction. This isn't just a story about a human life. It's a story about justice, strangled, and the day it rose. If you believe the truth must be heard, and justice must not be silenced, then like, subscribe, and ring the bell. Because this story, you need to know it all the way through. Late afternoon, the sunlight falls behind the trees, bending in the early spring wind. The whole Crescent Ridge area seems to be falling into a gentle sleep. The big houses, the gardens full of flowers, the quiet space, as if everything had been scheduled in advance, so orderly and perfect that sometimes makes people feel lost. Mrs. Martha Ellington, 68 years old, gently pruned a rose that had just opened its bud. Her hands held the scissors very slowly, her eyes lovingly following each soft petal, like silk. She used to be a literature teacher. The years in the classroom taught her patience and a love for quiet beauty. For her, this garden is not only a place of color, but also a place to bury her worries, a place to recall peaceful memories of her late husband, a place filled with afternoons when she waited for her son to come home after a long day in court. 113. Crescent Ridge belonged to Jeremiah Ellington, her son, a prominent federal prosecutor, but to Martha it was simply the house for the two of them. She had lived with him since she retired. Although her son had repeatedly urged her to hire a gardener, she had always refused with a gentle smile. If you don't garden, who will talk to the flowers? But that afternoon, that peace was torn apart by a single sentence as dry and out of place as the sound of a rock being thrown against a glass door. "Hey, old lady, stop. What the hell are you doing here at this hour?" Mrs. Martha looked up, bewildered. A tall man in a police uniform was approaching her from a patrol car parked diagonally across the street. He walked quickly, his back slightly hunched forward, as if he were preparing to subdue a criminal. In that moment, Martha didn't know what to do, but grip the pruning shears tightly in her hand, not out of fear, but out of confusion. "Excuse me, what did you say?" she asked, her voice still calm. "I was just tending my roses." Tending roses. Here the policeman raised his eyebrows, squinting around the garden. Then his gaze fell on her. Her dark skin, her old lavender sweater, the cloth hat she wore when she was out in the sun. He sneered. "You don't live here, do you? The maid must have snuck out while the boss was away doing something shady, right?" The insult fell like a slap to Martha's face. For a moment she said nothing. She just stared into the policeman's eyes. They were no longer gentle, but filled with pain and surprise. Not out of fear, but because she couldn't believe that after all these years of living, teaching, contributing to the community, and being so close to death, she would be so blatantly humiliated by someone younger than her just because of the color of her skin and the way she dressed. "I'm not a maid," she said slowly. "This is my son, Jeremiah Ellington's house. I live here." The name Jeremiah Ellington gave the officer a brief pause, very short. He frowned, then sneered. "Jeremiah Ellington. Here. Don't make things up. Show me your papers. Do you have ID? You have to prove you're not a homeless person or a fraudster in disguise." Martha sensed that the tone wasn't a demand, but an insult legitimized by a badge. But she didn't lose her temper. She had taught generations of students to keep their cool when they were misunderstood. And she herself, a mother, could not let anger overpower reason. "I was in my own yard," she said, her voice firmer, but still controlled. "I didn't bring my purse into the garden, and I'm not obligated to show my papers when I've done nothing wrong." But she knew no amount of reasoning could calm a mind so full of prejudice. Martha saw in his eyes not suspicion, but a long, simmering hostility. He clenched his hands into fists. His breathing began to quicken. The veins in his neck stood out. "You're resisting a law enforcement officer. I doubt you." Martha took a step back. Her hand, still holding the pruning shears, lifted slightly, as if by reflex, to protect herself from the man who roared at her with hostility in his eyes. Just that small action, a natural reflex, was interpreted by a panicked and distorted mind, and in that moment her fate was sealed. The moment Martha lifted her hand, a natural reflex for an older person, when someone approached in a threatening manner, was the moment Officer Travis Holden's mind went into overdrive. His face was tense red with anger. There was only one thought in his head. His authority was being challenged, not by a dangerous criminal, not by an armed man, but by an old black woman who had dared to disobey orders. "You're hiding something!" Holden roared. His right hand was firmly on the butt of his gun, shaky but steady. Mrs. Martha was startled, her eyes wide. She held only a pair of small old scissors, the tips still stained with pollen from that morning. She tried to speak slowly and clearly. "I don't have a weapon, I just—" "Drop your weapon." The scream was like a thunderclap tearing the peaceful afternoon apart, and then there was no time for explanation. Bang! The shot rang out. Lightning fast, deliberate cold. The metal clanged, then fell to the grass. The small scissors flew from her hand. Martha staggered. Her trembling hand clutched at her chest where blood was beginning to seep through her purple sweater. Her eyes widened. Not from pain, but from utter shock, as if she hadn't yet comprehended what had just happened. A bullet, from someone in a civilian uniform, had pierced her heart. "Oh my God," she whispered. Her lips trembling, her legs retreating a step, and she collapsed right next to the rose bush she had just pruned. Red petals fell lightly covering her hair. A cruel farewell she had not expected. The whole Crescent Ridge neighborhood fell silent. Only the wind blew through the trees, and Travis Holden's frightened gasp. He stood there, his hands still stiff, his eyes on the gun in his hand, as if it were a foreign object. Then his eyes slid down to where Martha lay motionless on the grass, blood spreading into a dark red pool in the soft green carpet. At that moment his heart was beating not with conscience but with panic. The first scream came from the second floor of the house across the street. A white woman, still holding a glass of wine, stood frozen behind a glass door. Then another door opened. Then footsteps ran into the yard. Then a burst of sound. "Oh my God, someone's been shot. Someone call 911. Holden snapped out of his stupor. As a trained reflex, not moral, but the survival skill of someone who has made a serious mistake. He hurriedly put his gun in his holster, pulled out his walkie-talkie, and said quickly, "Officer, this is Patrol Car 708. Shots fired at 113 Crescent Ridge. Subject, threatening behavior, forced to fire in self-defense. Requesting ambulance and emergency assistance." His voice was shaking, as if he himself did not believe the fabrication. In a few minutes, the familiar sound of the siren rang out. Flashing red and blue lights streaked across the sunset sky. The police arrived. The ambulance arrived. But it was all too late. 2 paramedics rushed to Martha, checking her pulse. Blood pressure, one shook his head. The other covered her with a white sheet very lightly. The roses nearby still swayed in the wind, as if not wanting to believe that their owner had just passed away forever. The woman was no stranger. She was the mother of federal prosecutor Jeremiah Ellington. But none of the police on the scene knew that, not yet. The first officer to arrive on the scene sighed. He looked at the body, then at Holden, his face pale, his eyes vacant. "What the hell happened here, Holden?" Holden didn't answer. He just bowed his head. His lips pressed together as if trying to construct a story in his head. An excuse Some reason to cover up the obvious truth he had just killed an innocent mother. But somewhere else, just a few blocks away, a man's phone was about to ring. A son. A prosecutor. A man who had just walked out of a tense conference room to go home to his mother for dinner. He didn't know anything yet. No one knew that the death that had just occurred would ignite a storm of justice unprecedented in the city's history. The moment Martha Ellington lifted her arm, an innocent gesture, as if to shield herself from the sun, or to ward off a heavy gaze, was the trigger for an irreversible tragedy. The police officer Travis Holden took another step forward, his palm tightening on the butt of his gun. His face was twisted with rage, or rather with a vague fear wrapped in a shell of power. Inside, he could no longer control himself. Only one voice echoed in his head. She's against you. She despises you. He no longer saw the gentle old woman pruning flowers, nor the neatly tied gray hair, nor the patient eyes. He only saw a dangerous figure that he had unconsciously been programmed to fear and confront, since who knows when. "You're hiding something!" Holden shouted, the sound so loud that the rose hedge behind Martha shook slightly, as if in shock. "I have nothing." Martha took a half-step back, still holding the blunt pruning shears. Her voice shook slightly, but she maintained her composure. "I'm standing in my own yard. You're not allowed to. Drop your weapon. Drop it." The words were so loud that no one could understand them. There was no waiting, no countdown, no real warning, just an unconscious command full of fear and rage, issued by the gunman legitimized by his uniform and badge. And then, bang! The sound rang out, sharp as a whip across the calm afternoon sky. The deafening sound ripped through Crescent Ridge like a knife, slashing through the fabric of civilization and false luxury that had made up the neighborhood. Martha Ellington paused. For a moment, she didn't understand what had happened. Her eyes widened, her chest heaved, her slender hand dropped the pruning shears. A stream of blood spurted from the center of her chest, staining her purple sweater. Her favorite sweater her son had given her on her birthday. Each strand of wool was gradually dyed red. Red from the wound, red from blood, and red from an injustice that could not be named. "Oh my God," she breathed. Not a cry of pain, just a whisper, like she was trying to pray. Her body leaned to the left. Her heels slipped lightly on the wet grass, and she collapsed, right next to the rose bush she had just pruned. The rose petals fell onto her silver hair, clinging to her now limp hand, as if sending this old, loyal friend of the garden off to a place farther away, quieter, safer. Travis Holden did not move. He stood frozen. In his hand, the Glock was still hot. In his eyes, there was the image of a corpse. No weapon, no guilt, no danger. Just a mother. But in his mind, panic was burning like wildfire. "What have you done? Oh my God. What have you done?" The years of training, the hours of ethics classes, all of it was now worthless scraps of paper. Then the door across the street swung open. A middle-aged woman, still holding the phone, screamed, "Oh my God. There's a gunshot. Someone's been shot." Another voice echoed from the second floor of the house next door. "It's Martha. She's gardening." "Oh my God. What the hell is going on?" Holden was instantly startled, as if being strangled back to reality. He took a step back. His eyes darted around, as if searching for an escape route. But there was nowhere to go. In a state of semi-panic, he pulled out his radio, trying to keep his voice steady but shaky. "This is Patrol Unit 708. There's a threat. I must shoot. Need an ambulance. Emergency assistance at 113 Crescent Ridge." He tried to construct a scenario, a story of self-defense. A false report, in the faint hope that his uniform would protect him, as it had before. Less than 5 minutes later, police lights cut through the darkness, sirens wailing above the birdsong. An ambulance pulled up. 2 paramedics rushed in with a stretcher, checking pulse and breathing. One shook his head slowly. The other gently draped a white sheet over Martha Ellington's emaciated body, a mourning symbol among the flowers. There was no chance of recovery. There was no chance of explanation. There was no chance for her son to hear that last voice again. Other officers began to arrive surrounding the scene. Neighbors crowded outside the yellow tape, whispering questions, their eyes filled with horror and shock. A young lieutenant approached Holden, pulling him aside. "Did you just shoot that old lady?" "What the hell happened?" Holden was silent. His face was white sweat dripping down his collar. He couldn't answer. He knew that any words would be a trap for him. In house number 113, just a few feet from Martha's body, the landline phone began to ring, but no one answered. Because the person who would answer, the mother who answered with a gentle, "It's..." Ellington was lying motionless under a white sheet just a few feet away, and in a building 5 miles away, a federal prosecutor had just finished an emergency meeting. Jeremiah Ellington was packing up his papers to go home. It was Thursday, the day he and his mother usually had dinner together. In his mind, he might be thinking of the pies she used to bake. Maybe of the familiar hug she gave him when she opened the door. But he didn't know. None of that would ever come back. The afternoon wind rustled through the ancient maple trees, but it did nothing to ease the tension that hung over 113 Crescent Ridge. Now a crime scene. Yellow police tape was in place, and a no-knock warrant was issued. But the whispers and questions would not stop. "She did nothing wrong. I saw her cutting flowers so peaceful. Why did he shoot?" The question rang through the minds of many people, but no one said it aloud to the uniformed men processing the scene. Because they knew when a cop says self-defense, the truth is often hidden behind the closed doors of internal affairs. Travis Holden slumped in his patrol car, the door closed. He was not handcuffed. He was not questioned. His badge was not stripped. He was just temporarily isolated from the scene. Standard procedure, but his mind was not calm. His cheeks were twitching. Sweat was still running down his temples, and he was muttering the exact words he had said over the radio a few minutes ago, as if he had memorized them. The subject was acting threateningly, reacting aggressively. "I was forced to fire in self-defense." It was just one sentence, but it had to be his only shield against the eyes that were on him. And the truth that was about to be dug up. Detective Leonard Brooks, who had been immediately dispatched from the Maple Hill Police Department's Criminal Investigation Unit, arrived on the scene within 20 minutes of the shooting. He was no stranger to police shootings of civilians, but when he heard that the victim was an elderly woman, unarmed and shot in her own yard, he sensed something was more wrong than usual. He ordered the entire scene locked down, all equipment seized. A forensic officer quickly reported. "We found a small pair of pruning shears dropped about a meter away from the victim. No signs of assault. No blood. No skin. No external evidence other than a bullet wound to the left chest." Brooks frowned, signaling the officer to take a rough sketch of the scene angle of shot distance, body position, footprints, shell casings, and most importantly, the body of the camera mounted on Travis Holden's chest. "Collect it. Seal it. Send it to the forensics lab. No alterations. No copies. This may be the only thing that will tell us the truth," he said. Meanwhile, another team member found the victim's wallet in the living room containing an old driver's license in the name of Martha Louise Ellington, along with a social security number, family photos, and most notably a handwritten address book with a name circled in red. Jeremiah Ellington, U.S. Attorney's Office. Emergency contact. Brooks stood still for a moment. He had heard that name before. A chill ran down his spine. He picked up the phone and dialed the federal office listed on the paperwork. After a few rings, a deep male voice answered. "U.S. Attorney Jeremiah Ellington. How may I help you?" Brooks swallowed. He had never dreaded a call like this in his career. "Mr. Ellington, this is Detective Leonard Brooks, Maple Hill Police Department. I'm afraid I have some very sad news to report. There has been a shooting at 113 Crescent Ridge. The victim is a woman named Martha Ellington." Was silence, long, suffocating. "Mr. Ellington," he repeated more slowly. "That was my mother?" Jeremiah's voice was hoarse, like someone had just sucked the air out of his lungs. "My mother was home alone today." Brooks closed his eyes. "I'm so sorry." "She didn't make it. The case is under investigation involving an officer, Travis Holden. No one heard the screams. No one saw the collapse on the other end of the line, but Jeremiah Ellington's eyes were empty, as if the rest of his heart had been set on fire. No tears fell at that moment, but the silence inside him was more terrible than the crying. "I'll be there immediately. Don't let anyone touch my mother's body until I get there. And don't let the person who shot her leave the police station." The call ended. At the scene, a few neighbors began to shout. I was the first to see it. "She did nothing wrong," a middle-aged white couple said through tears. "We lived next door to Martha for 2 years. She never raised her voice. How could this happen?" But in the patrol car, Holden was still replaying the false report in his head. He didn't know or didn't want to know that the storm was brewing from the wound she had just fallen into. And not far away, federal agencies were beginning to receive initial information about the incident. The name Jeremiah Ellington was ringing off the phone at the Justice Department. This was no ordinary police shooting case. This was the beginning of a political, legal, civil rights case of national proportions. Death, however silent, leaves a sound in the hearts of those who witness it. And the death of Martha Ellington, a black mother shot in her own backyard, has left a deep scar in the conscience of the Crescent Ridge neighborhood. The patrol car in which Travis Holden sits becomes the center of attention, not because he has been arrested, but because he is still a police officer and still armed. In the car, sweat beading on his forehead, he is forcing himself to believe something that is not true. "I had to shoot. She was acting dangerously. I had to shoot," repeated like a mantra, as if saying it enough times would make it true. But something is wrong. It's not just the body under the white sheet lying right behind his car. It's the unnatural silence from his teammates. The lieutenant in command of the scene, Douglas Tran, an Asian officer with nearly 2 decades on the force, didn't see Holden as a brother in uniform. He saw him as a suspect, which was rare. "We need all the body cam data," Tran said, turning to the crime scene technician. "Not until morning. Download now, SEAL. Now avoid any interference from the department." There were shootings where one only needed to check protocol. But Tran's first look at the body's position, the distance between the shell casings and the sap-stained pruning shears, was enough to tell him there was no assault here. There was fear, and this fear was brought on by a gun. When Detective Leonard Brooks appeared on the scene, the first look he gave Martha was not that of an investigator, it was that of a father. He sat down next to the body looking at the white sheet just long enough to cover her muddy shoes, his hands still clenched as if grasping some memory. Why was she treated like this, he thought. After receiving the initial report, he called a young policeman over. "Who reported first?" "Officer Holden, sir." "Any witnesses?" "The neighbor across the street." "There are at least 3 initial statements." Brooks nodded. Then he saw something nearby. A gardening tool basket. There was nothing in it but gloves, an old pair of scissors, and an unopened water bottle. No knives. No long, sharp objects. Nothing that would make a normal person feel threatening. A group of policemen began to disperse, knocking on doors around the area. A woman named Janet Whitman, who lived next door to Martha, saw the police and rushed out in tears. "I saw everything." She was standing still. She was just holding scissors. Small, like school scissors. She was cutting flowers. "Did anyone see her threaten the police?" the officer asked. "No. On the contrary, he came up to her screaming like he wanted to fight her. I thought he was drunk." The statements began to come out, in rapid succession, consistent, completely contradicting Holden's self-defense claim. Meanwhile, Holden was taken to the temporary headquarters, which had an isolation room for police shootings. He was not yet handcuffed, not yet charged. But no one spoke to him as a comrade anymore. Detective Brooks walked in. No greeting, just a look lasting a few seconds. "Do you know who I am?" Detective Leonard Brooks Holden stammered. "Good. I'm not here to convict you. I'm here to take an official statement, and just so you know, everything you say will be recorded, will be released, and will be compared to the body cam footage we've seized." Holden swallowed. I saw her acting strange. I suspected she wasn't a resident. I asked for identification, but she wouldn't cooperate. Then she raised her hand, like she was about to take something out of her pocket. I thought it was a weapon. You thought, or did you know? I don't know. But I was scared. It was the first time Holden had said anything he really meant. Not self-defense, not danger, just I was scared. And that fear killed a mother. Meanwhile, at the scene, forensic officers discovered a crucial detail. The body cam on Holden's chest, although turned on, was blank for the first 3 minutes with no clear audio. There were signs that it had been turned off and then turned back on. One of the officers spoke up. If he intentionally turned the camera off when he approached the victim, that's a serious violation. Brooks frowned when he heard the news. Contact the FBI immediately. This is no longer an internal investigation. When he pulled out his phone to call the U.S. Attorney's office, he sensed the storm brewing. Not just from the woman's fatal shooting, but from the name he had just read in the victim's contact list, Jeremiah Ellington. Less than 5 minutes later, when he told Jeremiah on the phone, the entire investigation office fell silent. The death of a mother, unknown to the world but priceless to her son, is now knocking on the door of justice. And the truth, no matter how many false reports, false excuses, or closed records, will eventually be dug up from the very gun that Travis Holden fired. On the 12th floor of the Maple Hill Federal Office Building, Jeremiah Ellington stood before a whiteboard covered with case diagrams. He had not left his office for more than 3 hours. His steps, slow, steady, were as if he were carrying the weight of the legal system on his back. He was planning a complex trial, unaware that the pain of his life was exploding right at his door. When the phone rang, Jeremiah did not answer it immediately. He watched it vibrate like a dark premonition knocking on the door, and when he picked up the receiver, the caller's voice, Detective Leonard Brooks, had an odd reserve. An eerie silence laced his words. "Mr. Ellington, I'm sorry. There has been a shooting at 113 Crescent Ridge." Jeremiah paused. "The victim is a black woman, Martha Louise Ellington. Have confirmed that she was pronounced dead at the scene. Shot by an officer. Travis Holden." He didn't answer. No screams, no panic, just a dead silence. In that silence, Mr. Brooks thought the line had gone dead. But then Jeremiah's voice rang out. Deeper, almost lost. "That was my mother." A long, heavy sigh, followed by a cold, knife-like question. "Who gave him permission to pull a gun on my mother? What did she do wrong? Where was she?" "In the garden. With pruning shears. We have witnesses. Cameras are seized." Jeremiah didn't say more, just a quiet reply. "I'm coming. Don't let anyone touch you. And don't let that guy leave the police station." 17 minutes later, the black SUV roared into Crescent Ridge, a posh neighborhood now packed with cops, reporters, neighbors, and strangers filming. When Jeremiah stepped out of the car, the air seemed to hold its breath. He was wearing a black suit. His tie was askew. No one could see his face, but there was a fire in his eyes. A fire that was not loud, not fierce, but burned away all excuses and lies. He did not hurry. Each step he took through the yellow tape parted like water. No one dared to stop him. He reached his mother's body just a few steps from the front steps and knelt, gently lifted her cold hand, pressing it to his cheek. A single tear fell, and when Jeremiah stood up, the entire city was behind him. The news that the victim was the biological mother of a high-ranking federal prosecutor spread like an electronic storm. Within 2 hours, the national media began to swarm. Maple Hill headlines flashed. Federal prosecutor's mother shot dead by police in her backyard. Police brutality continues to kill black men this time. The mother of a powerful man. Is the justice system facing itself? Maple Hill City Hall was closed to the public. The sheriff's office was surrounded by reporters and protesters carrying signs that said she was his mother. But how many other mothers are there who are not protected? In Washington, D.C., When Jeremiah Ellington's name appeared in an internal report, alarm bells rang throughout the Justice Department. An emergency meeting was called. The head of the Federal Justice Department immediately signed an order calling in the FBI for a special investigation. There was no longer any trust in Maple Hill's internal system. There was no room for self-examination. A high-profile civil rights shooting involving a family member of a federal officer has become a national priority. Just 9 hours after the shooting, an FBI plane landed at the regional airport. Special Agent Sarah Jenkins, who led the investigation into the murder of Breonna James in Illinois, was assigned to take over the Travis Holden Martha Ellington case. Jenkins did not smile or shake hands at the police station. The first thing she said to the local law enforcement team, "We're going to handle this. You're just providing logistical support. From here on out, anyone who conceals, obstructs, or otherwise violates the process is subject to federal investigation." At the makeshift morgue, Jeremiah was allowed to identify his mother's body. He didn't cry. He just looked at her. Long, and then he placed his hand on her chest where the bullet had gone. "I will not let you go in silence," he whispered. "I will make this country hear your name just once and remember it forever." The phone rang. He was about to let it go, but some vague feeling made him pick it up. U.S. Attorney's Office. Ellington. On the other end, Detective Leonard Brooks's voice was cautious, each word like a sharp knife, slowly cutting through the air. "I'm afraid I have some bad news, Mr. Ellington. There's been a shooting at 113 Crescent Ridge." Jeremiah paused. That number was his house, his mother's home, his only home after his father's death. The victim is a woman named Martha Ellington. The world around him seemed to bend. There was no sound, no gravity. It was as if someone had sucked all the air out of his body. She didn't make it. The killer is a patrol officer named Travis Holden. Silence. But not because there was no emotion. It was because the emotion was so great, so overwhelming, so intense, so full, that there were no words. "That's my mother," Jeremiah whispered. "She's the only one home tonight." Brooks hesitated. "I'm sorry. She's in the garden, cutting flowers. Unarmed officer. Body cam. We're securing the scene and the body." Jeremiah didn't respond. He hung up without saying goodbye, without giving instructions. Just took a deep, deep breath, but not enough. The air was like iron. His chest felt as if a boulder were pressing down on it. The woman who had called him my baby boy now lay under a white sheet because of a gunshot, because of a misunderstanding that no one wanted to name racist. 19 minutes later, the black government SUV turned sharply into the Crescent Ridge neighborhood. The first reporters who arrived were able to film the car door opening and Jeremiah stepping out, his face devoid of tears, but his eyes so cold that it made one shiver. He walked past the officers, as if no one was there. Each step was a blow to the eerie silence. Everyone stepped aside. No one dared to stop him, not because he was a prosecutor, but because he was a son walking toward his mother's body. He knelt beside the white cloth. His hand trembled slightly as he touched the part of her sweater that was still stained with blood. The familiar scent, the light perfume his mother used to spray on her sleeves was still there, but the body was cold. "Mom, I'm home." "I'm sorry I wasn't here, but I promise. This isn't a meaningless death. You're not a forgotten name." After confirming his identity and ordering a federal crime scene, Jeremiah stepped inside. Every corner, every photo, every curtain reminded him of his mother. The woman who had supported him, cooked for him, comforted him, and taught him that justice was non-negotiable. He opened a drawer and pulled out a framed photo she had kept on the shelf, him as a law school graduate standing next to her. She was wearing a floral dress, her wedding ring on her finger, even though her husband was dead, and her eyes were filled with pride. "I'm going to make the world know who you are, Mom," he whispered. "I'm going to make them bow to you." At Maple Hill Police Headquarters, the phones began to ring incessantly when the victim's name appeared as Martha Ellington, and the emergency contact listed as Jeremiah Ellington, U.S. Attorney. The commanders began to sense a change in the atmosphere. A police shooting of a black man case, usually buried in the darkest of accounts, had become a political bombshell. Police Chief Raymond Hale, upon receiving the full report, sat silent for 10 minutes before calling the Justice Department. "I'm afraid this is beyond our ability to investigate. I'm appealing for federal direction. The victim is the mother of U.S. Attorney Ellington. The public has gathered. The media is swarming." That same night, the U.S. Attorney's Office in Washington, D.C., issued an order to take over the federal investigation. The reason given was to ensure maximum transparency in a case that involves serious civil rights violations and has a direct connection to a high-ranking law enforcement official. Special Agent Sarah Jenkins, a veteran of the Federal Bureau of Investigation, was named to lead the case. She was the one who led the investigation into the police killing of a Louisiana high school student, which resulted in 3 officers being sentenced to life in prison. Jenkins landed in Maple Hill at 3:24 a.m. No warning, no flashing lights, no press conference. Just a sleek SUV parked right in front of the police station, and a sharp voice. "I'm Agent Jenkins, FBI. As of this moment, case number 2025 C.R. Ellington is under our jurisdiction. All data cameras, statements, weapons, turn it in." The police assistant hesitated for less than 4 seconds. Jenkins glanced at her. "Either you turn it in, or I'll write you up for obstruction of a federal investigation." Meanwhile, social media exploded. Martha Ellington was trending just an hour after the news broke. The hashtag #Justice for Martha appeared on more than 800,000 posts in the morning alone. A video clip of Jeremiah kneeling over his mother's body went viral with more than 12 million views. And the only question that rang out across the forums, if even a federal prosecutor's mother can be killed, who else is safe? On television, a prominent anchor tearfully said she was not an anonymous victim. She was a mother, a grandmother, a woman who loved her garden, and she died because someone felt threatened because she had a different skin color. And in a small office west of Maple Hill, Jeremiah Ellington looked at the crime scene camera feed, where his mother sat cutting flowers, scissors in hand, purple sweater, quiet smile. He did not shed a tear. He just said quietly but firmly, "I want every frame, every sound, every second. I want the truth stripped to the bone. No deletions, no edits, no excuses." On the 3rd floor of the temporary FBI headquarters in Maple Hill, the main screen displayed a 7-minute, 40-second video feed taken from the chest camera of Officer Travis Holden. The room was almost silent. No one spoke, no one moved, no one breathed heavily. In the center of the room sat Special Agent Sarah Jenkins, flanked by senior civil rights investigators, audio-video analysts, and the special federal prosecutor assigned to handle the case on behalf of Jeremiah Ellington. Across the table sat a figure not in command, rather as a personal witness, Jeremiah Ellington, dressed in a white shirt and ash-gray jacket, sitting upright, but clenching his fists so hard his knuckles were white. "Play," Jenkins ordered. The video began. The screen went black for the first 2 seconds. The intercom, the engine, and Holden's steady breathing. Then the scene unfolded. The patrol car turned onto Crescent Ridge. Holden stopped for no reason, glanced to the side, where Martha Ellington was bending down to cut roses in the garden. His voice rang out clear, without a trace of panic. "Lady, stop! What the hell are you doing?" The entire conference room was startled by the harsh, spiteful voice, the complete opposite of the polite report Holden had submitted. Martha turned around. Her voice was soft, polite. "I'm just tending the roses. This is my garden." Holden got out of his car and walked toward her, the camera swaying slightly in time with his footsteps. His eyes scanned Martha from head to toe. "You don't live here, do you? You're the maid." The sneer was audible through the microphone. The officer's eyes were full of prejudice and disdain. Martha frowned. "This is my son's house. I live here," Holden continued. "Show me your ID, or I have the right to suspect you of trespassing." Martha, though she was starting to get tired, kept her voice patient. "I don't carry my wallet in the garden. I'm not supposed to show ID in my yard." The video began to change direction. Holden tightened his grip on the gun. His breathing was heavy. Martha raised her hand involuntarily, a familiar reflex when someone got too close. Not a quick, Not unusual movement, just a defensive instinct. Holden's voice was hoarse, unnatural. "Drop your weapon." The entire room held its breath. Then came the fateful moment. Bang! Martha staggered, clutching her chest, and collapsed. The video ended. No one said anything. Jeremiah Ellington's voice was hoarse and growling. "That's my mother." And it was a murder. Nothing more, nothing less. Sarah Jenkins closed her eyes for a few seconds, then turned to the tech team. Analyze the speed of the reaction. Get the speed of the victim's hands, the angle of her shoulders, the volume of the officer's voice. "I want a formal report within 24 hours. A civil rights investigator whispered, "No threats, no weapons." Shots were fired. 7 seconds after the order was given. Too fast to be self-defense. The media had no access to the original video, but the FBI's preliminary report was leaked accidentally exactly 48 hours later. The headline was shocking. Camera recorded victim unarmed. No threats, shot in his own home. Anger was in the streets. Tens of thousands of people took to the streets carrying portraits of Martha Ellington, a mother, a gentle old woman. And the slogan, "If they can kill her, they can kill anyone." The Maple Hill mayor's office immediately issued a statement. "We are shocked and saddened. We are committed to cooperating fully with the federal investigation." Chief Hale was placed on leave pending a review of his responsibilities. Officer Travis Holden, who had sat calmly writing a self-defense report, was now quarantined, stripped of his weapon and badge, and placed under 24/7 surveillance at an FBI shelter. Holden was distraught when he learned that the video had been analyzed. When he learned that the victim was the mother of a federal prosecutor. When he learned that the FBI was digging into his old case file. When he learned that the international media had begun calling the incident a new George Floyd in a police uniform. He was no longer so bold. No more, "I feel threatened," repetitions. He just sat, eyes wandering, his back pressed against the interrogation chair, knowing that the camera he carried, once a symbol of protection, was now an undeniable indictment. Sarah Jenkins turned to Jeremiah. Her analysis finished. "We're going to take him to court. We're not going to be lenient. This was a premeditated crime." Jeremiah didn't smile. He didn't nod. He just said one sentence, low and clear. "Then let's get started." A printer in the FBI's temporary Maple Hill office cranked all morning. Sheets of paper were pushed out steadily, coldly, like the fragments of a file falling from a rusted machine. The name at the top of the page. Travis Holden. Police title. Patrolman, Rank Sergeant Affiliation, Maple Hill Police Department, Report Number 13755. Underneath that bold headline was a list of more than 42 pages of complaints and behavioral records collected over 7 years of service. The first, 2019. A black student was pulled out of Holden's car during a simple traffic stop. Holden's dashcam recorded him calling the student a brat nigger when he asked why he was stopped. The internal records read, "Officer displayed unprofessional behavior. Issued verbal warning. No disciplinary action." 4th, 2020. A Latino mother accused Holden of yelling and threatening her son by putting his hand on the child's forehead and saying, "If you grow up like your father, I'll lock you up before your 18th birthday." The complaint was dismissed for insufficient evidence. 9th, 2021. An Asian delivery driver filmed Holden handcuffing him without any evidence of wrongdoing. When asked, "What did I do wrong?" Holden replied, "You don't look like you're from around here." The clip went viral, but after 3 weeks, the incident was suppressed. Internal records state, officer was sent for 3 hours of multicultural retraining. 3 hours for 7 minutes of overt racism. Total 19. Formal complaints. 9 from people of color, 6 from white witnesses. 4 were suppressed before they reached the Independent Commission of Inquiry. Not one demotion, not one suspension with pay. Special Agent Sarah Jenkins looked at the pile of files almost a hand high. Her eyes, which had seen countless similar cases, narrowed. They've known for a long time who he is. They just don't care. She turned to the civil rights team. "I want to find out who signed off on allowing Holden to continue carrying a gun, who overrode the warnings, who wrote those retraining notes." At the Maple Hill Police Department, Mid-level commanders began to sweat. Several former officers who had worked with Holden were now being called in for testimony. One officer who did not want to be named testified. "We called him the explosive cop." He joked once, "If I shoot you by mistake, just say you feel threatened. You can handle any situation." Nobody laughed, but nobody reported it. Another female officer said through tears, "I filed an anonymous report about him verbally abusing black people. They told me to take it back, said I was too sensitive." Jeremiah Ellington held each report as if it were a bomb that went off too late. Each page was a missed opportunity to save his mother. They weren't unaware, he said at an emergency press conference. They just didn't see it as a problem. Until my mother was killed. Public anger exploded. Hundreds of protesters surrounded the Maple Hill Police Department overnight. Banners reading, "What? Warnings equals to one murder. This is not a mistake. This is complicity. They create monsters, then cry when monsters kill people," filled the streets. Maple Hill City Council held an emergency meeting. The result: the Internal Affairs Division was disbanded with all oversight powers transferred to an independent agency overseen by the Justice Department. 6 internal affairs officers were suspended. Police Chief Hale was formally removed from office. Sarah Jenkins, in her report to the federal government, concluded, "Officer Travis Holden did more than just commit murder. The system gave him the power to do it. This case cannot be closed with a conviction. It must be closed with reform." And when the meeting ended, Jeremiah Ellington quietly gathered up his copies of the violation file, keeping one, folding it and putting it in his pocket. He walked out of the building through the crowd waiting outside. All eyes were on him, as if he were leading a new tide. A tide of people who had been pushed aside by justice. He held the paper high, reading aloud. "This is the file of a man who has repeatedly insulted, threatened, and discriminated against. And it has been ignored 19 times. My mother needed someone to believe her just one of those times. But no one did. On the morning of the first hearing, the gates of Maple Hill Federal Courthouse were a geopolitical flashpoint. National media crowded the entrance. Civil rights groups, law students, local residents, all lined up since 4 a.m. They weren't there out of curiosity. They were there to testify in a historic showdown between a lie with a badge and a truth with tears. In courtroom 6B, all eyes were on the defendant's chair, Travis Holden. His hair shaved close, his loose suit bulging over his sleepless body, sat with his head bowed, his hands clasped tightly around the edges of his chair. On his collar, there was still a red mark where his badge had once been, now stripped. Across the table was the prosecution led by Special Prosecutor Amanda Holloway, a brown-skinned woman with steely eyes and a voice as loud as a bell. She was one of the first people to take a murderous officer to trial and win. Opening statement: "The truth is evidence." Amanda stepped forward, undocumented. Bare-handed, staring straight at the jury. "You're going to hear a lot of things. Fear instinct, self-defense. But I'm not going to ask you to trust your feelings. I'm going to ask you to look at the evidence. Because the truth, without makeup, because Martha Ellington, the woman lying in her own garden, died simply because she existed in the presence of someone who didn't accept the color of her skin." She pressed the remote. The body cam video played. The room held its breath. Every insult, every harmless movement, every second shortened by a gunshot. When the video ended, one of the jury members had tears in her eyes. Amanda turned around. "You've just seen what Mr. Holden calls intimidation. I call it what it is, daylight murder. The defense is shaking." The defense attorney, Gary Trent, an old hand in the officer protection world, steps forward in a low voice trying to gain sympathy. "Gentlemen, my client acted under pressure. He thought she had a weapon. He's haunted by attacks on police. This was a psychological reaction, not an intent to kill." He turns to Holden. "Do you think she could have killed you?" Holden, pale, nods weakly. But the jury isn't looking at him. They're looking back at Martha on the screen. Small, gentle, frail. No weapon. No threat. No sign of resistance. Witnesses: neighbor expert son, The first witness, a 76-year-old woman who lives across the street from Martha, said through tears, "I saw it all from the window. She was cutting flowers." Then he screamed. Then, she collapsed. The second witness, an FBI video analyst, stated, "The shoot response occurred 1,007 seconds after the initial command was given. During that time, the victim did not move in an aggressive manner. There was no weapon. There was no threatening behavior. The speed at which the hand was raised was not above the average natural reflex." The final witness, Jeremiah Ellington. He took the stand. The courtroom fell silent. The testimony of his son. The voice of millions. Jeremiah did not look at Holden. He looked at the jury, and then at the live television cameras recording the trial. "I'm not here as a prosecutor. I'm here as a son who called his mother that morning, told her to eat lunch, to dress warmly, and then in the afternoon stood over her cold body because of a bullet that no one stopped." He pulled out a piece of paper, the 2021 internal complaint, and held it up. This is the 11th time he's been charged with racism. If just one person in the system believed this, just one, my mother would still be alive. But they chose to remain silent. He took a deep breath, his voice hoarse. "That's why I'm asking not just a sentence for my mother's killer. I'm asking you to send a message to the people who stood behind him to sign the exoneration reports, and to let my mother fall like an accident when it was a consequence that everyone saw coming, except my mother." Jeremiah sat down. The courtroom remained silent. A tear rolled silently down a juror's cheek. On the afternoon of the 21st day of the trial, courtroom 6B was packed as silent as a chapel before the chant. All eyes were on the 12-man jury, returning after nearly 48 hours of deliberation. They sat in rows, their faces solemn. No smiles, no eye contact, just the heavy weight of their choices. The judge stood, his voice as deep as cracked earth. "May I ask the jury, have you reached a verdict?" The jury foreman stood holding a stack of papers. "We have reached one. The verdict is unanimous." The entire courtroom held its breath. Jeremiah Ellington sat in the front row, his face bowed, his hands clasped together, his lips pressed tightly together. 4 meters away, Travis Holden bowed his head, but his neck was red. His pulse was clearly throbbing under his shirt collar. Each count, each blow to the betrayed trust. Count 1. Violation of civil rights resulting in death. Guilty. Guilty. Count 2. Use of a deadly weapon. In the commission of a crime. Guilty. Guilty. Count 3. Second-degree murder. Guilty. Guilty. 3 times. 3 voices. 3 hammers pounded on the old wall. A choked sob echoed from the audience. It was a middle-aged woman who had complained to Holden, but no one believed her, and Travis Holden, upon hearing the word guilty, for the 3rd time, hung his head, his shoulders shaking, not because of remorse, but because he knew the uniform that had protected him was gone. Forever. The judge announced the end of the trial. The trial will move to sentencing in 10 days. But for millions watching on television and social media, the guilty verdict was a victory. Not just for Martha Ellington, but for the invisible people who have been stifled by the system. The national reaction, pain turned into movement. Less than an hour after the verdict, the central square of Maple Hill was packed with people. In their hands were pictures of Martha. On their shirts were the words, "I am Martha Ellington." Justice didn't come to her in time, but it will come to us, not another mother. In New York, Los Angeles, Atlanta, thousands took to the streets. On Twitter/X, the hashtag Justice for Martha reached more than 30 million mentions. A series of major newspapers such as The Washington Post, The Guardian, Le Monde called this trial a historic verdict for justice delayed. Jeremiah Ellington. Final words in court. The day after the verdict, Jeremiah stepped up to the podium to address the press. His voice was low and calm, but his eyes were still red. "I couldn't save my mother, but I believe she saved something bigger. The belief that justice still has a place in this country." He paused. then ended with a sentence that left the nation speechless. My mother didn't die from a bullet. My mother died because people thought the color of her skin was something dangerous, preparing for sentencing. Choosing between two fates. After being found guilty, Travis Holden was transferred to a high-level federal prison awaiting the final decision. Life without parole, or death penalty. The sentencing committee convenes where lawyers, witnesses, and the victim's family will have the final say to shape Holden's final sentence. In that dark room, every word spoken will not only decide the fate of a man, but also send a message to every police officer who harbors prejudice in their hearts and thinks the law is always on their side. Maple Hill Federal Courthouse. Sentencing day. The space outside was filled with people, press, and civil rights organizations. From the rooftops of buildings across the street, long cameras were trained on the heavy wooden doors where the verdict would be read, which would decide the fate of a man and mark a milestone in the history of American justice. Inside, Travis Holden, wearing a dark blue prison uniform, was brought in and sat under white lights. There was no defense attorney by his side, no more haughty appearance. He was a shrunken ghost, pale broken. Jeremiah Ellington walked slowly in. No black suit. He wore a light gray shirt, simple like a normal boy, but his eyes held the weight of a nation that had been suppressed for too long. The judge stood up. His voice boomed. After considering all the factors, the seriousness of the crime, the irreversible consequences, the clear racial bias, and the betrayal of the public trust, the court sentences Travis Holden for second-degree murder and civil rights violation resulting in death to the maximum penalty under federal law. The court sentences death. The courtroom fell silent. Some covered their mouths. A few reporters stopped typing. A few hugged each other silently. Travis Holden collapsed in his chair. He screamed, then fell silent. No one consoled him. Not a single plea was made. Outside the courtroom, the entire city erupted, not in joy, but in shock. For the first time, a white police officer had killed an unarmed black man and was sentenced to death. Jeremiah Ellington's last speech. That afternoon in the town square, Jeremiah stepped up to a makeshift wooden podium. No microphone, no guards, just him, his voice, and his pain. Today the court has rendered a verdict, but real justice is not there. Real justice is when a black mother is no longer questioned in her own yard, is when her son doesn't have to use his status to get what's right, is when people like Holden are never issued guns, not when they pull the trigger and are tried. He paused, then looked out into the distance where thousands stood silent. I lost my mother. You lost your faith. But today we have something more important, our voice. And I swear on my mother's soul I will never let that voice be stifled again. Finally, one son, one nation, one hope. As darkness fell over the city, the people did not leave. They placed red roses in front of the courthouse wall. Roses like Martha Ellington had tended day by day. Each flower was a promise, not to forget, not to be silent, not to retreat. And among those petals, Jeremiah stood still. The wind blew gently through his shirt. In his heart, the wound of losing his mother would never heal. But there, faith had sprouted. The faith that if we do not remain silent, justice will not rest in peace. This is not an isolated story. It is a cry in the dark. The tragic end of thousands of names that have been buried under the rubble of unfortunate incidents. But this time, the mother of a federal prosecutor became the victim, and the nation was forced to open its eyes. A 72-year-old black mother, kind, quiet, just trying to tend her garden in peace, was viewed with suspicion just because of the color of her skin. A woman who was unarmed, who made no threats, who did not scream, was ended by a bullet and a fabricated lie. And how many more deaths like this will it take for the system to admit the problem is not individual incidents, but the very heart of the machinery that administers justice? Are you outraged? You should be. Because if a federal prosecutor's mother can be murdered for no reason, any of us, your mother, your grandmother, or yourself could be next. The lesson here isn't just about the law. It's about personal responsibility, each of us, when we see injustice. It's about not being silent when we see someone being harassed, questioned unjustly, or stripped of their dignity because of their appearance. It's about awareness that society can't forever rely on status to define who deserves to live and who doesn't. Jeremiah Ellington didn't just stand up for his mother, he stood up for the millions who have no voice, no cameras, no protection. And you, yes, you could be next. Don't let this story pass by as just another video. Like, comment, share your feelings about the injustice that Martha suffered. Say what you think, because every comment you make is a testimony for justice. And if you truly believe that the truth must be spread, that justice must not be silent, then subscribe to the channel and turn on the bell so you don't miss any of the next stories. We don't tell stories to entertain. We tell stories so that people like Martha Ellington will not be forgotten, so that the gunmen will bow their heads, and so that the next generation will know we were not silent.